Welcome to your Jamestown video. In this video, we are going to be talking about the colonization of Jamestown and kind of how Jamestown went from being almost a failure to the first successful colony. So let's jump right into it. Successful colony, take two. We know Roanoke was a failure, so we pick ourselves up, we dust ourselves off, and we try again. And the second try came in 1607 when the colonists landed in a region north of Roanoke in Virginia, in what's called Jamestown. And they name it Jamestown to honor King James. So yay, here we are trying again in a new location. Once they get there, they realize that there's some good things about Jamestown. You have some good harbors, the rivers, you're able to navigate the rivers. The land is pretty fertile, more fertile than it was in Roanoke. But the tribes that were there were more powerful than what the colonists had to deal with in Roanoke. You had about 24,000 Indians that were in the region, and they were united by a pretty powerful chief named Powhatan. Or Powhatan. So rather than confront the colonists with heavy casualties, this Native American leader decides that it's best to contain them and then to use the English against his own enemies. And his enemies were the Native Americans that were in the interior of what's today Virginia. He especially wanted to trade with the colonists for their metal weapons, so even though he was a little weary of them, he didn't necessarily try to kill them off right away. The colonists, however, wanted Native American land, and they refused to recognize that the natives occupied the land and they had ancestral ties to the land. So there was definitely a push and pull relationship with the Native Americans in Jamestown. Now, even though Jamestown was in a better location than Roanoke, it still had issues, and it was basically starting to fail as they got started there in 1607. Jamestown is surrounded by swamps, which is good because it would help protect the town from Native American attacks, but it's bad because swamps breed mosquitoes, and mosquitoes carry deadly diseases like malaria. And then the colonists also suffered from hunger, and because they were too hungry, it caused them to get weak, and because they were too weak, they couldn't tend to their crops. And so if you can't work, you can't get your crops, you don't have food anyways. So Jamestown definitely had some major issues going on. Between the years 1607 and 1622, about 10,000 colonists came over, and only 20% of them would be alive by 1922. That's about 2,000. So they were dying off pretty rapidly in Jamestown from starvation and malaria. And enter John Smith. So you guys have probably heard of John Smith and Pocahontas from the Disney movie. Total lie, and I'm going to tell you what really happened. So in 1609, war breaks out between the Native Americans and the starving colonists. And in 1613, the English captor Powhatan's favorite daughter, Pocahontas. Now, in the movie, Pocahontas marries John Smith. In real life, Pocahontas married another colonist named John Rolfe. So when she was captured by the English, she actually converted to Christianity. She marries John Rolfe, and she changes her name from Pocahontas to Rebecca. So Pocahontas became Rebecca. Now, John Smith does have an important role in the colony of Jamestown, not as Pocahontas' man, but as kind of the savior and the leader of Jamestown. The winter of 1609 to 1610 becomes known as the starving time because the colonists were just really, it was winter, they hadn't harvested any crops. It was just really bad. And in the springtime, John Smith decides that he needs to institute a new rule. No food, no work, no food. If you're not going to work for your food, then you can't eat it. And so this kind of helps to motivate the colonists a little bit, try to get in the rebound a little. There is a legend that John Smith does get caught by Powhatan, and he was about to kill him, and you can see in the picture, don't kill him, because Pocahontas throws herself over him, trying to save his life from her father killing John Smith. But again, she doesn't marry John Smith, she marries John Rolfe. And John Rolfe is an important guy in Jamestown as well because he introduces tobacco. So by 1616, the colonists were working, hard. Remember the no work, no food type rule. And, they were growing corn and squash and beans, and they were making enough to survive. But they weren't growing anything to make a profit, to make money. And enter John Rolfe. He introduces them how to cultivate tobacco. Now, tobacco plants need a long, hot, and humid growing season. And that is not the weather that's in England. So England couldn't grow these crops, but Virginia could. And once they started growing Virginia and it went back to England, it caught on like quick fire. In 1624, you went from 200,000 pounds to 1.5 million pounds in 1640. So tobacco became known as a cash crop, where they would grow it not for survival purposes in terms of food, but they would grow it for to make money. And because tobacco was so profitable, you have something called the headright system that gets instituted. And notice two vocab words over here, guys. So beginning in 1619, the Virginia Company offered free land. Under the headright system, anyone who would pay for passage to Virginia or who paid for another person's passage to Virginia would receive 50 acres of land. So if you paid to come to Virginia or you pay for someone else to come to Virginia, you are getting 50 acres of land. The headright system enables the wealthiest colonists to start gaining up lots of land and start creating large plantations. And to work these plantations, you need people. So before they thought of slaves, of Africans, they actually had something else. They started to import workers from England. And this causes Jamestown population to really grow. The Virginia Company starts to hire indentured servants. So an indentured servant is a person who comes to work in the new land. Their passage is paid for by the person they're working for. So like their boss pays for them to come over to the new world. And they have to work for a certain number of years in exchange for payment to the new world. So if someone pays for me to go to Virginia to work on a tobacco plantation, I now need to work for them for usually 4 to 7 years, depending on what your contract is, until you pay off the transportation costs for coming into the new world. And because now you have so many people in Jamestown, and Jamestown is really taking off, the Virginia Company also institutes political reforms. So someone needs to run Jamestown. It can't just be John Smith. And they create something that's called the House of Burgesses. And this is the first representative government in colonial America. And basically what the House is allowed to do is that male landowners could elect two representatives that would represent their settlement in the government. And they would make laws, they would raise taxes, and this is actually the start of self-representation or representative government in the English colonies. What kind of our Constitution becomes now and how we are the way we are now. It starts right over here, guys, in 1619 with the House of Burgesses. Notice that's a vocab word, and yeah, we have two other vocab words over here. In 1624, guys, the crown, the king decides that he's going to take over Virginia, take it away from the Virginia Company, and he makes it the first royal colony in the English Empire. So during the 17th century, the English started to develop two types of colonial governments, royal and proprietary. The royal colonies belonged to the crown. The king owned them. And the proprietary colonies would belong to the powerful individuals or companies like the Virginia Company, which is an example of a joint stock company that we talked about in the Roanoke video. So the House of Burgesses is the first representative government, royal colonies, proprietary colonies. And this is pretty much Jamestown. So make sure that you guys are able to answer these 9 questions. Remember, you don't need to write down the answers in your notes, but just skim your notes, make sure you have these answers there. And that's it. You are done. And I will see you guys tomorrow in class.